It started with a casual call from Emily, a close friend of mine who'd always had a knack for sensing when something was wrong. I didn't think much of it at first. We hadn't spoken in a while, and I figured she just wanted to catch up. Instead, her voice carried a mix of hesitancy and urgency. "Listen," she began, "I need to tell you something, and it's not going to be easy to hear." My heart sank, though I didn't know why. Emily wasn't one for drama. She was straightforward, no nonsense. "What is it?" I asked, trying to mask the unease creeping into my voice. "It's about Ashley and her manager." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stayed quiet, waiting for her to continue, but my mind was already racing. Ashley was my girlfriend of 3 years. We'd been living together for 2, building a life I thought was solid. I loved her deeply, or at least I thought I did. Emily hesitated. "I didn't want to get involved, but you deserve to know. I have proof." She sent over screenshots of messages, flirty exchanges that left little to the imagination. There was no mistaking it. Ashley was cheating on me with her manager. And the worst part? It wasn't a one-time thing. It had been going on for months. As I scrolled through the messages, my hands shook. Anger bubbled beneath the surface, but it was the betrayal that cut the deepest. I thought about all the times Ashley had come home late, claiming she'd been working overtime, too tired to talk. I'd believed her. I'd trusted her. Emily stayed on the line, giving me space to process. Finally, I spoke. "Thank you for telling me. I need some time to figure out what to do." And figure it out I would. But I wasn't going to confront Ashley. Not yet. If she was capable of lying to me so easily, I needed a plan. Something that would make her feel even a fraction of the pain she'd caused me. For the rest of that day, I acted as if nothing had changed. Ashley came home around 7:30, earlier than usual. She breezed through the door with her usual smile, setting her bag down on the kitchen counter. "Hey, babe," she said cheerily, kissing my cheek like nothing was amiss. "How was your day?" I mumbled something vague, forcing myself to smile back. It was surreal, watching her move around like everything was normal. The proof Emily had shown me was fresh in my mind. Texts where she'd promised her manager she'd find a way to see him soon without me noticing. Seeing her now, acting sweet and carefree, made me sick. But I couldn't let her know what I'd found. "Not yet." "You okay?" she asked, noticing my distracted mood as she poured herself a glass of wine. "You seem off." I shook my head quickly. "Just work stress. Deadlines piling up." Ashley nodded, sympathetic. "Well, maybe we can unwind this weekend. I've been wanting to check out that new Italian place downtown." "Sound good?" "Sure," I replied, my voice steady even though my mind was screaming. "Italian place? A romantic dinner?" While she was sneaking off with someone else. The audacity of it all made my blood boil. But I kept calm. For now. The next few days, I focused on my plan. I couldn't just confront her and let it turn into a dramatic argument. That would give her the chance to explain, to spin her lies, to manipulate me. No, I wanted to do something that would make her understand the weight of her betrayal. I wanted to leave her questioning everything, just like she'd made me do. First, I called a locksmith. "I need the locks changed on my house," I told him. "And I need it done fast." The locksmith came the next morning while Ashley was at work. By the time they left, every key she had in her purse was useless. I stared at the shiny new locks, a small sense of satisfaction brewing in me. This was step 1. Next, I packed a bag. Nothing dramatic, just enough clothes and essentials to last me a week. Then I booked a quiet Airbnb in a small town 2 hours away, somewhere Ashley would never think to look. By the time she came home that evening, I'd be long gone. Leaving the house that day felt strange. It wasn't just my home, it was ours. I'd painted the walls in the living room while Ashley picked out the curtains. Every corner held a memory, from the couch where we'd watched countless movies to the kitchen where she'd taught me how to make her grandmother's lasagna. And yet, knowing what I now knew, those memories felt hollow. False. Before walking out, I left her a simple note on the dining table. Nothing emotional, nothing accusatory. Just enough to let her know something was up. Gone for a while. Don't wait up. It was vague on purpose. I wanted her to feel unsettled, to wonder where I'd gone and why I hadn't told her. But I wasn't doing it out of pettiness. Well, not entirely. I needed her to sit with her guilt, to stew in her own thoughts. Let her mind fill in the blanks. I stayed off the grid for the next few days. No calls, no texts, no social media. I kept my phone on silent and only checked it once a day, just to make sure there weren't any emergencies. Unsurprisingly, Ashley had called and texted me repeatedly. "Where are you? Are you okay? Why didn't you tell me you were leaving? Please, just call me back. I'm worried about you." Her messages started off concerned but eventually shifted to frustration. "You can't just disappear like this. What's going on? We need to talk, okay? Please come home." I didn't respond to a single one. Instead, I spent my days at the Airbnb, going on long walks, clearing my head. At night, I replayed everything in my mind: the way she'd lied to my face, the way she'd kissed me with the same lips that whispered sweet nothings to another man. It hurt, but with each passing day, the anger outweighed the pain. By the end of the week, I was ready to face her. Not to argue or shout, but to finish what I'd started. I drove back to the house early Saturday morning. As expected, Ashley was home. Her car was in the driveway. I parked a block away and walked the rest of the way, wanting to see her reaction when she realized the locks had been changed. Sure enough, when I rounded the corner, there she was, standing on the porch with a mix of confusion and panic on her face. She tried her key again, jiggling it in the lock as if sheer willpower could force it to work. I stepped forward, making my presence known. "Problem?" I asked casually, though my heart was pounding. Ashley spun around, her eyes wide. Relief flashed across her face, quickly followed by frustration. "Where have you been?" she demanded. "Why isn't my key working?" I shrugged. "I had the locks changed." Her jaw dropped. "You what? Why would you?" "I think you know why," I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. For a moment, she just stared at me, searching my face for answers. Then, almost instinctively, she started lying. "I don't understand. Did I do something wrong? Why are you acting like this?" I raised an eyebrow. "Don't play dumb, Ashley. It doesn't suit you." Her face paled, and I could see the gears turning in her head. She opened her mouth to say something, but I held up a hand to stop her. "I know everything," I said simply. "About you. About your manager. Don't insult me by pretending otherwise." Her eyes widened in shock, and then, for a split second, I saw it. Guilt. Regret. But just as quickly, she masked it with indignation. "Who told you that? It's not true. Someone's trying to ruin us." I almost laughed. The audacity. But I didn't let her see how ridiculous I thought she sounded. Instead, I kept my tone steady. "Save it, Ashley. You made your choices. Now you'll have to live with them." She tried to argue, but I walked past her, leaving her on the porch as I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The conversation wasn't over, but for now, I was content to let her stew. Her lies were only just beginning, and I was ready to hear every last one of them. Ashley followed me into the house like a storm cloud, her heels clicking loudly against the hardwood floor. She was frantic, her voice jumping between anger and desperation. "You can't just walk away like this," she exclaimed. "You owe me an explanation." I set my bag down and turned to face her. The sight of her, arms crossed, her lips trembling just slightly, would have made me cave before. "Not anymore." "Explanation," I repeated coolly. "You want to talk about what I owe you? How about all the times I trusted you when you were sneaking off to be with someone else?" Ashley's face turned pale, but she quickly recovered. She had always been quick on her feet. "Sneaking off? Are you serious right now?" she scoffed, trying to sound offended. "Where is this even coming from?" "Emily told me everything," I said flatly, crossing my arms to mirror her stance. "She sent me the proof, Ashley. The messages. The plans. I know about your manager. So spare me the theatrics." Her mouth opened, then shut again. For the first time, she looked genuinely rattled. But Ashley was nothing if not persistent. "Those messages, they were harmless," she said, her voice trembling just enough to make it sound convincing. "Flirting, maybe, but nothing ever happened. You're blowing this out of proportion." I almost laughed. She was sticking to her story, even now. "Harmless," I echoed. "Is that what you call sneaking around behind my back? Lying about working late so you could meet him soon, as you put it?" Her cheeks flushed red. "It wasn't like that," she cried. "I was stressed, okay? He was just someone to talk to. I didn't know how to tell you how I was feeling." "Someone to talk to," I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Interesting. Did you need a hotel room to do all that talking? Her eyes widened, and she took a step back. The silence that followed was damning. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at me, before her defenses crumbled. Her shoulders slumped, and she let out a shaky breath. It wasn't supposed to mean anything, she whispered, her voice barely audible. And there it was. The confession. I stayed quiet, letting her words hang in the air. I could see her scrambling to figure out what to say next, how to twist the situation into something less damning. It was a mistake, she added quickly, her eyes filling with tears. A stupid, stupid mistake. I wasn't thinking straight. I stared at her, unblinking. How long, Ashley? Her lip quivered. It doesn't matter. How long? I snapped, my voice sharper than I intended. The anger I'd been holding back all week finally bubbled to the surface. Don't you dare downplay this. How long have you been seeing him? Ashley flinched but finally muttered. A few months. A few months. That meant this hadn't been a fleeting moment of weakness. This was deliberate. Repeated. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my composure. So while I was at home trusting you, you were out. What? Playing house with your boss. It wasn't like that, she insisted, tears streaming down her face now. I never stopped loving you. I just... Stop, I interrupted. You don't get to use that word. Love. People who love each other don't do this. They don't lie, cheat, and betray. Ashley covered her face with her hands, her sobs muffled. For a second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the sleepless nights I'd spent wondering if something was wrong. The texts Emily showed me. The lies. Any pity I felt was quickly replaced by anger. You need to leave, I said firmly. Ashley's head shot up, her tear-streaked face filled with disbelief. Leave. This is our home. We built this life together. I shook my head. You destroyed it. I changed the locks because I didn't want you walking back in here like nothing happened. This isn't your home anymore. You can't do this, she pleaded, stepping closer. Please, we can fix this. We've been through so much together. Doesn't that mean anything to you? It did, I said, my voice steady. Until you threw it all away. Her pleas turned desperate. I'll cut him off. I'll do whatever it takes. Just, don't give up on us. Us. I scoffed. There is no us. Not anymore. You made sure of that. She stared at me, searching my face for any sign of forgiveness. When she found none, her tone shifted again, this time to anger. So that's it? You're just going to toss me out like I'm nothing. I took a deep breath, letting her words settle. You were everything to me, Ashley. And you chose to risk it all for someone who clearly didn't care about you the way I did. So no, I'm not tossing you out like you're nothing. I'm letting you live with the consequences of your choices. Her anger faltered, and for the first time, she seemed truly defeated. Where am I supposed to go? She whispered, her voice breaking. That's not my problem, I said coldly. Pack your things. I want you out by tomorrow. And with that, I turned and walked upstairs, leaving her standing in the living room, tears streaming down her face. The sound of her quiet sobs followed me, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. This was just the beginning. The next morning, I came downstairs early, the quiet hum of the coffee maker the only sound in the house. Ashley hadn't slept in our bedroom, which didn't surprise me. I guessed she'd stayed on the couch or in the guest room. It didn't matter. I wasn't about to ask. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee, when I heard her footsteps coming from the hallway. She looked a mess. Her hair was tied back in a sloppy bun, her face pale, and her eyes red and puffy. She avoided looking at me as she shuffled toward the fridge, pulling out a bottle of water. We sat in silence, the weight of the situation hanging heavily between us. I didn't offer her a good morning. There was nothing good about it. Finally, she spoke, her voice hoarse. I'll pack my things today. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Do you really want me gone by tonight? She asked, her voice trembling. Yes, I replied without hesitation. She flinched at the bluntness of my response but didn't argue. Okay, she whispered, staring down at the floor. The day dragged on painfully slow. I stayed in the living room, pretending to scroll through my phone, while Ashley moved quietly around the house, packing her belongings. Every now and then, I'd hear the sound of a drawer opening, the clink of hangers being pulled from the closet, or the rustle of bags being filled. I could feel her presence hovering, like she wanted to say something but didn't know how to begin. She was probably hoping I'd come around, that I'd stop her and say we could work it out. But I wouldn't. By mid-afternoon, she finally broke the silence. She appeared in the doorway, her hands clutching a suitcase. "Is this really how it ends?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with an edge of bitterness. I looked up, meeting her eyes. "It didn't have to end this way. You made the choice to lie, to cheat. Don't put this on me." Ashley shifted uncomfortably, her fingers tightening around the suitcase handle. "You're not even willing to talk about it? To try?" "What's there to try, Ashley?" I said, my voice calm but firm. "You didn't come to me when things got hard. You didn't trust me enough to be honest. Instead, you went to him. That's not something we can come back from." She looked like she wanted to argue, to fight back, but instead, she just sighed. "I don't know where I'm supposed to go. You've got family. Friends," I said simply. "Emily helped me see the truth. Maybe you should call her. She's been pretty honest about things lately." That hit a nerve. Her eyes widened, and she took a step back. "Wait. You and Emily." "Don't," I interrupted, cutting her off. "You don't get to spin this into something it's not. Emily's a real friend. She told me the truth when you wouldn't." Ashley stared at me, her expression a mix of hurt and disbelief. "I can't believe this," she muttered. As the hours passed, her bags piled up by the front door. She moved slower and slower, clearly trying to drag out the inevitable. I didn't offer to help. When the time finally came, Ashley stood by the door, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said quietly, her voice breaking. I looked at her, the woman I'd loved, the woman I thought I'd spend my life with. For a brief moment, I saw a flicker of the person I'd fallen for. But it wasn't enough. "You did though," I said simply. "And there's no undoing it." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Without another word, she picked up her bags and walked out the door. I watched as she loaded everything into her car, her movements slow and reluctant. When she finally drove away, the silence that followed felt deafening. I stood by the window for a long time, staring at the empty driveway. Part of me expected her to turn around, to come back and beg for another chance. But she didn't. Instead, I turned away and walked upstairs. I knew there was no turning back now. This was the first step in rebuilding my life, without her in it. And somewhere, deep down, I knew this wasn't just the end of something. It was the beginning of something new. Something better. I just didn't know what that looked like yet. Once Ashley left, the house felt hollow. I sat on the couch, staring at the empty doorway where she'd stood just hours ago. Her absence was a strange relief, like a weight lifted off my chest, even if it left a bruise behind. The first thing I did was walk through the house. I wasn't searching for anything specific, just trying to feel out the space now that it was mine again. Her scent lingered faintly in the bedroom, her favorite coffee mug still sat in the sink, and there was a half-finished bottle of her perfume on the bathroom counter. I packed those small reminders into a box. It wasn't out of anger, it just felt like clearing the air. I taped the box shut and left it by the door. If she needed it, she could come pick it up later. The night stretched on. I turned on the TV for noise, but the shows blurred together. My mind kept returning to everything she'd said before leaving, replaying her excuses, her tears. "I never wanted to hurt you." How many times had I heard that line in movies or books? It always felt hollow there too, like a way to escape blame. I didn't doubt she felt regret. She probably even felt pain, but it wasn't enough to undo what she'd done. As I sat in the quiet, my phone buzzed. "Emily, how are you holding up?" I stared at the screen for a moment, unsure how to respond. Finally, I typed, "She's gone." Her reply came quickly. "You did the right thing." For the first time all day, I felt a twinge of comfort. Emily had been my rock through this mess. She hadn't sugar-coated the truth or let me wallow in denial. "Thanks," I wrote back. "I don't know what's next, but I'm glad it's not this." That night, I slept in the middle of the bed for the first time in years. The silence wasn't easy, but it was honest. I didn't know what the future held, but at least now, it was mine to figure out. The next few days passed in a blur. The house felt strangely foreign without Ashley's presence. It wasn't just her absence that struck me, it was the emptiness of what she'd left behind. Her half of the closet was bare, The nightstand she'd once cluttered with books and knickknacks now sat untouched. I threw myself into cleaning, not out of necessity, but because it gave me something to focus on. The process was cathartic in its own way. Every swipe of a cloth or emptying of a drawer felt like reclaiming my space, my life. Her scent lingered faintly on the sheets, the furniture, even the air itself. That, too, had to go. As I worked, memories of her kept surfacing. The way she used to hum while cooking, the mornings when she'd leave little notes for me on the fridge, even the fights that once seemed so trivial. They were all tainted now, their sweetness turned bitter by the lies I hadn't seen coming. When I finished clearing the house of her lingering presence, I finally felt like I could breathe again. It was painful, but it was a necessary step. I also started reconnecting with parts of myself I hadn't realized I'd let slip away. For too long, I'd wrapped so much of my identity around our relationship, around being us. Without that anchor, or maybe that chain, I had to figure out what was left. I returned to the things I used to enjoy but had sidelined for her. Long runs through the park, trying new recipes in the kitchen, even diving into a book I'd put off for months. It felt strange at first, almost forced, but little by little, it started to feel natural. Still, there were moments of doubt. I'd catch myself wondering if I'd made the right choice, if things could have been salvaged. But every time those thoughts crept in, I reminded myself of the betrayal. The lies. The months she'd spent with someone else while I believed in us. By the end of the week, the house felt less like a battlefield and more like a place I could start over. The emptiness no longer haunted me. It offered freedom. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but maybe it was the life I needed. As I settled into my new normal, life began to feel manageable again. The routines I rebuilt for myself gave me structure and stability, but there was still an undercurrent of loneliness I couldn't shake. It wasn't about Ashley anymore. I'd accepted that chapter was closed, but the quiet evenings alone served as a constant reminder of what I'd lost. Then, one afternoon, I received a message from Emily. It wasn't unexpected. She'd been checking in on me periodically since everything fell apart. This time, though, her message carried a different tone. She invited me to join her and a few friends for a casual gathering at her place. For a moment, I hesitated. The thought of stepping into a social situation, even a small one, felt daunting. But then I realized this was exactly what I needed. An opportunity to reconnect, to remind myself that life didn't have to revolve around the betrayal I'd experienced. The evening at Emily's was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the isolation I'd been feeling. Her friends were easygoing and kind, offering laughter and conversation that felt refreshingly unforced. Emily, as always, had a way of making people feel at ease, and her efforts didn't go unnoticed. As the night went on, I found myself gravitating toward her. She had been a constant through the chaos, her presence steady and reassuring. Watching her interact with others, I noticed qualities I hadn't fully appreciated before. Her wit, her thoughtfulness, the way her laughter could light up a room. There was a moment when our eyes met across the table. It wasn't loaded with meaning or expectation, but it lingered just long enough to leave an impression. When I returned home that night, I couldn't stop thinking about how different I felt. The gathering had reminded me that life could be light, even joyful. And Emily, well, she'd reminded me that not all connections were built on lies. For the first time in weeks, I went to bed feeling something that closely resembled hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start. In the days that followed, I found myself thinking about Emily more often. It wasn't intentional, at least not at first. Memories of the evening at her place crept in, the sound of her laughter, the way she leaned in when someone spoke, genuinely interested in their words. She messaged me a few times, always checking in under the guise of friendship. Her words carried no pressure, no expectations, just warmth. I began to look forward to her texts, even caught myself smiling when her name popped up on my phone. When she invited me to join her for coffee, I agreed without hesitation. Meeting her felt natural, not forced. The coffee shop was small and cozy, the kind of place where people lingered over their cups. We talked about everything and nothing. Work, hobbies, the ridiculous things we'd seen online. Not once did she bring up Ashley or the mess I'd been through, and for that, I was grateful. Being with Emily was easy. There was no tension, no second-guessing. I realized how much I'd missed the simplicity of honest, meaningful conversation. She had a way of making the world feel lighter, like maybe it wasn't as complicated as I'd made it out to be. Afterward, as we walked back to our cars, the air between us felt charged with something unspoken. It wasn't romance exactly, but it was something. Possibility, maybe. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to consider what that might mean. I didn't rush it. I didn't need to. But that coffee date marked the beginning of something I hadn't expected. A slow, steady shift from friendship to something more. It wasn't about replacing Ashley or filling the void she'd left. It was about moving forward, about finding joy in someone who had already proven her loyalty and care. The road ahead wasn't clear, but for once, I wasn't afraid to take the next step. Over the following weeks, my connection with Emily deepened in ways I hadn't anticipated. What started as occasional texts or casual coffee meetups soon evolved into something that felt steady and dependable. She became a fixture in my life, not as a replacement for what I'd lost, but as a reminder of what genuine connection could feel like. She was patient, never prying too much into what I was going through, but she had a knack for understanding when I needed space and when I needed someone to lean on. Her presence was calming, a stark contrast to the storm that had uprooted my life just weeks ago. One evening, Emily suggested we go for a walk at the park near her apartment. The air was crisp, and the leaves had started to turn, painting the trees in shades of orange and gold. It felt like the kind of setting meant for fresh starts. We wandered the trails, talking about everything under the sun. She told me about her childhood, her love for photography, and how she'd taken up painting during the pandemic just to have something creative to focus on. I shared pieces of myself too, stories I hadn't revisited in years, parts of me that had felt buried under the weight of my failed relationship. At one point, we stopped at a bench overlooking a small pond. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the water. It was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. Sitting there, I felt a rare sense of peace. I turned to Emily and thanked her, not just for that evening, but for everything. For being honest when others wouldn't, for standing by me when my world fell apart. She didn't say much in response, just smiled softly, but it was enough. As the silence stretched between us, I realized how much I'd come to trust her. Trust. That word carried so much weight now. It wasn't something I gave freely anymore, not after what Ashley had done. But with Emily, it felt natural, even easy. The next weekend, Emily invited me to a small gathering with a few of her close friends. It wasn't anything fancy, just a backyard barbecue, but it was the kind of event I hadn't been part of in a long time. Her friends welcomed me warmly, and though I was nervous at first, their easygoing nature quickly put me at ease. I caught glimpses of Emily throughout the evening, laughing with her friends, checking on the food, even sneaking a glance in my direction when she thought I wasn't looking. It was in those quiet moments that I realized how much she had started to mean to me. When the evening wound down, Emily and I found ourselves alone, sitting by the fire pit as the others drifted off one by one. The conversation flowed, as it always did with her, but there was an undercurrent of something new, a tension, a possibility. As the firelight flickered in her eyes, I felt a pull I hadn't expected. It wasn't the desperate, fleeting desire I'd felt in the aftermath of my breakup. It was something steadier, more grounded. A quiet longing for connection, for closeness. I didn't act on it, not then. It wasn't the right moment. But when I drove home that night, the feeling lingered. For the first time in months, I felt like I was moving toward something, not just away from the past. Over the days that followed, I found myself thinking about Emily constantly. Her laughter, her kindness, the way she had this uncanny ability to make everything seem less overwhelming. I wasn't sure if she felt the same way, but I knew I couldn't keep pretending that what I felt was purely friendship. One evening, I decided to take a chance. It wasn't a grand gesture, just an invitation to dinner at my place. I wanted to show her a side of me she hadn't seen yet, to open the door a little wider and see if she was willing to step through. When she arrived, she brought a bottle of wine and that easy smile I'd come to love. We spent the evening cooking together, an activity that felt so simple yet carried so much meaning. There was no pretense, no pressure, just two people enjoying each other's company. As the night went on, the conversation grew quieter, more personal. I found myself telling her things I hadn't shared with anyone since Ashley left. How I doubted myself, questioned my worth, and struggled to trust again. Emily listened without judgment, her eyes steady and kind. By the time the evening ended, I knew I couldn't keep my feelings bottled up any longer. When she stood to leave, I walked her to the door, my heart pounding. I didn't know what would come next, But I wasn't afraid anymore. For the first time in a long time, I felt ready to let someone in. Whatever happened, I knew Emily was worth the leap. The night I finally let my guard down with Emily marked a turning point. After walking her to the door, I hesitated for a moment before speaking. There were no dramatic confessions, no long speeches, just an honest acknowledgement of what had been building between us. Though she didn't say much, the look in her eyes said enough. It wasn't just kindness I saw there, but something deeper, something I hadn't let myself hope for. She smiled softly, lingering a moment longer before heading to her car. As I closed the door behind her, I felt a quiet sense of certainty settle over me. The next few weeks unfolded with an ease I hadn't expected. Emily and I didn't rush into anything. There were no labels, no declarations, just a steady deepening of what was already there. We spent more time together, cooking, going for walks, watching old movies. It wasn't grand or flashy, but it was real, and that was enough. One evening, as we walked through a quiet trail, the conversation turned to my past. Emily didn't push, but when I brought up Ashley, she listened intently. Talking about it felt different now. The anger and pain were still there, but they didn't consume me like they once had. Emily had this way of making me feel heard, understood, without judgment or pity. It was something I hadn't realized I needed until I had it. As the seasons began to change, so did my outlook on life. The weight I'd been carrying for months started to lift, piece by piece. The house, once filled with memories of betrayal, began to feel like a home again. Emily didn't fill the spaces Ashley had left. She created new ones, spaces that felt brighter, lighter, and entirely ours. For the first time in a long while, I found myself looking forward to the future. It wasn't just about moving on, it was about building something better, something that felt grounded in trust and mutual care. The night it became clear that Emily felt the same was unassuming. We were sitting on my couch, the glow of a forgotten movie flickering in the background. Without saying a word, she leaned her head on my shoulder, a small but significant gesture. In that moment, I realized that healing wasn't just about letting go of the past. It was about opening yourself up to what came next, even when it scared you. Emily didn't just help me move forward. She reminded me that I was worth more than the betrayal I'd endured. With her, I found not just a partner, but someone who saw me for who I was, scars and all, and didn't shy away. What began as a friendship born from the ashes of heartbreak had grown into something steady and real. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. For the first time, I felt like I was standing on solid ground, ready to embrace whatever came next. And as I looked ahead, I knew this was only the beginning.